Hey folks, welcome back to the Change Physician Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady, and today's guest, Dr. Mike Woo-Ming of BootStrapMD. And for today, we're going to be talking about Dr. Mike's kind of journey through medicine, how, why he went into medical school, but really how he developed his entrepreneurial bent. He's been pretty active in the entrepreneurial space pretty early on in his career. And we'll talk about what he has found advantageous doing that, why he's pursuing it, and his experiences as being a physician entrepreneur. So, Mike, thank you for joining us today on the podcast.
Kevin, it's been great. Thanks for having me.
And so let's start at the beginning, because we all have choices. And one of the big choices that we obviously had to make was, why did you go into medicine?
I don't think I was even given that option, to be honest with you. Well, my father's a pediatrician. My mom's an RN, immigrant family. My uncle's a thoracic surgeon, cousin's a dermatologist. I like to joke, and really makes for a very interesting family reunion. So I guess medicine was kind of, in my blood, so to speak. I try to go through different avenues. Like I was pretty active in my school newspaper, in my high school newspaper, and eventually my medical school newspaper. So I always had this journalism background. But my father tried to convince me that, even if you go into medicine, you could still pursue some of these avenues like journalism and such. But then he also said, well, look how much, a journalist gets paid these days. And so, again, money wasn't a part of it, but like I said, kind of being in this family where there's a whole bunch of clinicians, it was kind of easy to see where my path was going. And so that may be a part of this entrepreneur bent as to why I kind of pursued that, is kind of trying to find my own path, where early on maybe I didn't have that option.
So with that, if you're kind of going into medicine, whether intentionally or not, like sort of been guided in that process, what were your experiences then in medical school, particularly the differences between your first 2 years and the second 2 years when you go into clinical rotations?
I think it was very interesting. I don't think I've ever studied as much even to this day as I ever did start studying for the boards. In undergrad, high school, undergrad for the most part was pretty easy. But then getting into medical school, where, obviously it's tough getting into medical school. I went to the Midwest, where it was easier, really competitive in California. And just kind of being in that environment, where, although I had a close knit of friends, I also kind of, head on realized about competition. And back then, kind of dating myself, back in the 90s, it was really more towards specialty. I know ER. Back then, like, I remember some of the things that was interesting was we were all trying to kind of study so much. We're all studying. But then actually, in terms of our specialty choices, oftentimes it almost seemed kind of random. Like, give you an example, when I was in medical school was in the early mid-90s, okay? So the most popular show was ER, okay? So like half of my class wanted to go into ER medicine. And I think primarily because they see George Clooney and all those other actors and just kind of the excitement. And then for myself, I would say I was always into primary care. And, now it's certainly not as competitive as it was, but actually back then there was this drive to be more involved in the family medicine and understanding everything. And for me, I wasn't ready to say, yes, I just want to specialize in this organ. I just did not have that drive at that time. So for myself, I just said, I was going to go into primary care. It seems like I'm a little bit laid back. And just like today, lifestyle definitely played a role in it. Lifestyle for me kind of played a role. I think in rotations, I knew the specialties I didn't want to go into, and again, it's based upon, it's what we have, but we base our specialties basically on seeing like a small window of what we're exposed to, you know, in our third year medical school, you know, 1 month or 2 months. And then based upon that, you're going to decide what you're going to do for the next 30 or 40 years. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it was basically, I think in medical school, it was just basically, you just have to get to the next step. And you kind of had to define step of what you needed to go through, and you just did what everybody else did in class.
Yeah. Well, I have to say that it resonates, I think, with a lot of us, what you just said there. You don't have much time to make a decision. You have to make a decision, and it's on to the next thing. So being the next thing is residency and doing, you know, a primary care type specialty, were there any aha moments or realizations or I guess just lessons learned that you know, maybe impacted your future from then?
Yeah, so residency was really where my entrepreneurship really kind of like started for me. I think I went to Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale. I didn't go to in Minnesota, primarily because I wanted to get back to the West Coast. And it was really interesting being in a residency where Mayo Clinic is, you know, well known, very specially oriented, but we were in a family medicine residency where sometimes, you know, there would be some disconnect. And actually now that residency doesn't even actually exist. So I guess we know which side won. But what it allowed me to do is I had some really good role models, and I guess maybe just kind of being almost, I guess maverick isn't the right word for it, but it almost seems like we were, because we were trying to introduce a primary care model where many of our specialties, many of my attendings were also interested in things like integrative medicine. Like I was interested in acupuncture, and just to get that approved, like a rotation, I had to jump through all of these different hoops. But I did get exposed to attendings who kind of had that mentality is, hey, we're primary care in a specialty organization. We have to kind of fight with what we want. And so for me, that kind of ingrained me, maybe that entrepreneurship aspect of it. And then what I realized is that there were people who weren't just kind of following, you know, the status quo. You know, some things that I say in my residency, we introduced like hypnotism in residency, which is like unheard of, you know, and looking back in terms of things like smoking cessation and such. But just to get that like approved, I had some really good role models, and it really kind of, I think looking back, it kind of helped shape that entrepreneur bent that I had inside me.
It makes me think about how so much of, you know, how you were surrounded by those role models that have that entrepreneurial, or at least that mindset that you need to fight for what you think is right, or maybe fight for something you think that we should have. And that exposure to those versus like a lot of people that are in that status quo, they may not feel any sense of autonomy or a sense of choices. And it seemed like those role models created this pivot point of recognizing that, you know, I can fight for having a say or having autonomy or having a choice. I'm curious if where that went, unless Kevin, you have some other question on it, how that pivoted and shifted to what was next.
I totally agree. No, because
do you have any questions before I get to the pivot?
No, I think that's a great question, because the way you're explaining your residency, it almost seemed, I almost got a startup feel where your residency was the scrappy residency trying to prove itself to all the, you know, the big specialties down the block. And because you're in this environment now, it kind of shaped the way that you kind of saw your journey. So I definitely want to hear the answer to Melissa's question there.
So where did you go from there?
So actually my first entrepreneur bent was during my residency. And so when I graduated medical school, one of my fourth year rotations was in medical informatics. And I got involved in terms like the World Wide Web. Again, this is mid-90s. So, you know, pretty geeky. I got involved in the internet. My wife was, we were living in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I knew both from college towns. So go college towns. She was a librarian at University of Michigan, and I was going to school at medical school in Wayne State in Detroit, and was commuting. So in my fourth year of medical school, I was interested in medical informatics and using the internet, and how could we use the internet for medical education purposes. And we were just, this is all new. I mean, it was a really exciting time. And I remember my wife bringing home like a 3.5 disc, floppy disk, that had the word Netscape on it. And Kevin, I'm gonna just put this out there, that you probably are around my age, maybe a little younger. Actually, he looks much younger. But there was these discs, these floppy disks that we used to have, and it had the word Netscape or Mosaic, and then became Netscape, which was like the first browser.
Mm-hmm.
So World Wide Web browser. And it just really opened up my world. I remember watching like a graphic. Wow, well, it's going to take 10 minutes to download, but this is all exciting, because before it was just bulletin boards and just regular, there's no graphic. And so I was interested in these such things. And I remember creating my first web page back in 1995. And I brought my skills in medical informatics to my residency. And maybe it was that kind of individualistic mentality, but they say, hey, Mike, you're probably nerdy and probably geeky. Do you want to help develop a website for our residency? And I had self-trained, learning myself HTML, the language of how to create webs. I learned how to create websites. I said, yeah, I'll do that. And so my first website was for our medical residency.
Wow.
And at that time, my wife was pregnant, and this was first year residency. And I was working on this website, but I was also working, 100 hours plus as an intern, right? And as I was creating this website, I had it out there. It was one of the first few residency websites that I think ever existed on the web.
Wow.
And I started to get questions. So I talked about the Mayo Clinic residency, talked about, all the different admissions. I was involved in, later on I was involved in the admissions community, but it's all the things that we need to have about why I should come. But then I started getting questions about residency and about medical school and about, pre-med. And because what I had back then, they called it a guest book, where you could just leave comments, just like you leave comments in articles these days. And it was really just people who were asking about, well, how do I get into medical school and how do I get into residency? And because it was one of the few sites that were out there, they were starting to ask me all these questions. So again, reminder, I'm working 100 plus hours and I'm trying to answer these questions, but at the end it was I don't have time to do this. And then, hey, I just found out my wife is pregnant, and she was working as a librarian at a local university, and there was no family leave back there. So basically, when she went on maternity leave, we lost half of our income. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to answer these questions, but I said, maybe I can just it was mainly just to get them to stop asking me questions. And then I'll create what's called an FAQ. That was one of the things back then. A frequently asked questions, give me all your questions and I'll answer them all, but I'm going to put it in I typed it up and I went to Kinko's and I answered it. And if you want it, I'll send you the 50 top questions about residency, and I'm going to charge $15.
Wow.
And that was the start of my first, quote, information product. And again, this is before any of the gurus or anything like that. And I just forgot about it. So I did that. I said, let me try to figure out how to make up my wife's income, even though I can't moonlight, I can't do anything else. But here's the funny thing, is I started to get checks in the mail, these $15 checks in the mail. And then there's a couple things that I learned from that. One is never give your home address. The second thing is what I learned was I found something that people wanted, and it didn't. And then I slowly raised it to 25, and then 30, 50. I think I eventually stopped at $75.
Wow.
And I said, honey, look, we started getting these checks in the mail. And she's like, well, what are you doing? Is this are you doing something on the side or what it was? No, I said, I'm answering all these questions, and I was just doing this so they would stop asking me these questions. And then she said, and then I was reminded, like in my 4th year of medical school, that there were these companies that would help medical students apply for residency, like help them with a personal statement, these kinds of things. And I said, you know, some of the questions, because we're opening up these letters, and then like they'll have a check, and they'll talk about like who they are. And a lot of them were international medical graduates. They're trying to get into the United States. And they were asking me like, hey, could you help me with my personal statement? And then my wife would say, hey, you know, I can do this from home. I can help, you know, I can do some work like this. And again, this is like the mid 90s. There's no like Upwork, there's no Fiverr, there's nothing like that, right? So she's like, oh, well, I can just work from home and do this. And you go, well, let's do it. And so I started another website, this for people who are interested, and then we started developing services. So we started developing services like helping them write their personal statement. I then created like a recording, like how do you present yourself? How do you prepare for your first interview at a residency? You know, we did some medical school educational stuff. And again, I'm not telling you I got wealthy off this, but it helped us at a time where we were just like, I need to get revenue and I don't have any time to do that. So we developed a business, and that was my first, I guess, business, and it was online. Again, this is 1996, 1997. There was no PayPal, there's no Stripe.
There's no Google.
Like, there's nothing. I think
no
there was, yeah, there's Alta Vista. There was, you know, there was these other type of browsers that were out there. And again, I didn't know what the heck what I was doing, but what I found out was like, if you have something that's out there that people will want, people will pay for that. If you have some specialized knowledge, some expertise in it, and you establish that expertise, people will pay you for that. So we actually ran that for a few years until I went into my real job, you know, I went to graduate residency, but it definitely helped at a time where we really needed the help.
And it sounds beyond that, it not only helped you financially, but it helped you from a perspective of recognizing that there is this other option and there's ways that you could leverage your medical education that I'm sure people listening to this wouldn't even have thought that would have been possible. And again, you're doing it in a pre-Google stage, you're building these websites, and potentially a dinosaur or two is walking through the backyard that, you know, people don't appreciate in this day and age.
Yeah.
You used to have dial-up. I had like AOL and dial-up and.
Bing,
oh
bang,
yeah,
bing,
you know,
bing.
putting the phone in the. I mean, that's what it was before then. That's why, like I said, that Netscape browser was really, you know, that was a mind blower.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you're moving, you graduate residency, and then you start into your first practice. What did you discover there? Were you continuing these entrepreneurial ventures, or were you kind of overwhelmed with early practice?
Well, so here's the thing, right? So graduated residency, I got this little side gig that, you know, 15 years before side gigs were in vogue. And then I said, well, now I'm in, I found a job getting back to San Diego, where my wife is from, and where I went to school, undergrad. So we're back in California, life's great, you know, bought a house, got a house built, because now I'm quote making real money, right? And then when I got my first check, I was like, wow, there's a lot of stuff that they take out from you. Again, you know, in medical school, we get zero financial literacy, you know, maybe somebody talked to me at a lunchtime, but very little in terms of like, you know, how to review a contract. I didn't get any of that. And then I realized it's like, oh, wow, well, I just got, you know, a new mortgage at the time. You know, interestingly enough, my second child was on the way, and we have all of these expenses. And, you know, when I signed my guaranteed salary, my guaranteed, my job that gave me a guaranteed salary, what I realized is that it didn't guarantee me the same amount of hours. I mean, it didn't matter how many hours I work, I was guaranteed this amount of money. That's what I learned about that, right? So, you know, I joined a group, primary care. So there was family medicine, like myself. There's interns, internists. There was a couple of OBGYNs. But when I joined them, and their thing was, well, we need you to get your many patients. You need to get more patients because you're new. You need to be established. And they're my colleagues who have been there for like, 5, 10, 20 plus years. So they said, hey, well, we got this great idea. We have an extended hours that later became urgent care for us. And basically that period was, if they couldn't fit you into their schedule, they would go into this extended hours. And anybody that they didn't fit, they'd have to come back at 5 p.m. and then we'd open this up from 5 to 8 p.m. And they say, well, this is a great way of you getting more patients, is for you to be working evening hours in addition to your family medicine hours. But of course, you're only guaranteed that same salary, right? So I was getting more of these hats. So I became urgent care director. Then they told me I needed to get more geriatric patients. Then I became nursing home director for 3 nursing homes. Hey, you need a work comp guy. You're now our work comp guy. So I get all these different hats, but again, I'm young, I'm naive, and I'm just saying yes to everything because I don't want to upset the status quo. But what I was getting at was just, I started to look at like other ways to generate revenue, because again, it was in a situation where I wasn't in the same financial straits as it was before, but I wanted to find out, since I've already had a taste of this business that I had before, that maybe I could be doing the same kind of thing. And again, we're going to go back a ways, but this is in the year 1999 when I left, when I graduated residency and started my practice, that was kind of the dawn of the dot-coms. So if you're familiar with the dot-com booms, where people were spending crazy money over all this venture capital money, getting sites built on like pet food, and wow, this is really something. There's really some interesting things that are going on in Silicon Valley, and that led me to lead to other types of ventures. What could I do? What could I build that would would be something that take the notice of Silicon Valley? And that's where I started to lean at different types of entrepreneurial ventures.
So what would those, you say you're just leading in, what's the segue here? What were those things that you were drawn into? So
I remember talking to like my dad, who was a doctor, and I was telling him, there's something that's going on with this internet, and I've got some ideas. And one of the things that I would get, in addition to questions about residency, is I got questions about medical advice. Hey, and so I said, what if there was a site where we could just ask questions to doctors? And again, this was back in the late 90s. And then I know somebody's listening to this is like, doctors shouldn't be asking questions about health advice on the internet. But again, I just graduated residency, and I was like, oh, let's do it, see what happens, right? I wasn't asking anybody. And so I started a site called Ask the Doctors. And first it was just me asking it, and I was charging them $10 a question. And then I realized I had some doctors that said, hey, I want to join up. How do I find out? And again, this is back in the day where, doing something like this now, it'd be pretty hard to do. But this is back in the day where I submitted my website. Yahoo used to be a directory, and you could submit your website into Yahoo, and then they would accept it. And so I submitted my website where like Yahoo said, hey, thanks, we'll take a look at your website. That's how old this was. And then so I got all of this traffic, which was a site on medical advice. And so I would charge $10 a question, and then some doctors were interested in like, hey, can we sign up? And then I charged $15. So that's when I learned the importance of like outsourcing, because most people were asking for specialty questions, so I didn't have to take the time to answer it. And then basically I was just kind of the middleman for this site. And then, so that site actually got, I wouldn't say it got used, but it got noticed by like a bigger website. I'm not going to say the name because it doesn't exist anymore, but it was like a WebMD type site. And I actually was in negotiation with their site, and they actually kind of took over my site. I don't want to, I've talked about this previously, but suffice it to say is I kind of lost money in the deal because I got money in terms of stock. Eventually that business kind of crashed, so the stock is probably worth the same amount as this 8.5 by 11 paper that I have here. Be happy to send it to you. It makes for great wallpaper. But it got my first experiences about developing an internet business, and it was profitable. And again, it just like, once you kind of start your own business, then you just kind of like see where it leads. And it taught me that there was different ways to make revenue than just seeing patients every day. And again, because as I mentioned, you can understand that over time, it kind of dragged me because I was just being told where I needed to go. I wasn't getting paid more. I was being farther away from my family. I had 2 young boys, and it just it led me to realize that there were other ways that I could generate revenue besides just trading time for dollars.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings us to where you are. Well, we still have a number of years here, but so
We've only hit 1999. That's why I go. I know it's a short show, so I'll try to be.
Yeah. So how has this then transitioned? Because it sounds like we have a lot of doctors now. They're frustrated with practice. They're feeling like there's no control. Burnout, etc. But for you, it seems like it really, this interest that developed while you were a resident in an early adopter of the internet media. I mean, we're laughing and joking about it, but I'm sure some people are, what are you talking about? Pre-Google, pre-this. Like, no, it was a totally different world back then.
It was.
And now you're moving to this entrepreneurial space. So then how has that changed over the last 10, 15 years? Like, where are you now? Like, where are you blending as a physician plus really an internet entrepreneur? How have you kind of melded these two?
Right. So what that experience with that medical advice led me to was actually finding like-minded individuals. And we kind of talked a little bit before the call, was I started to go away from going to medical conferences at pay CME to internet entrepreneur conferences, right?
Yeah.
I remember this one time where I said I was going to Vegas, and it was for an internet business conference. And it allowed me to become friends with, I guess today, some of the biggest names out there. Like if you're familiar with Jeff Walker from Launch, he was launching the Launch Formula, Frank Kern. Some of these names you may or may not be familiar with. Russell Brunson became friends of mine. And it was almost, and I was like usually the 1 or 2 doctors in this whole room, there. And what's interesting about being friends with them is most of these folks never graduated college. Some did, some didn't. And they were making, extreme amount of money. I mean, you're multimillionaires that, they're out there. And being in an environment where I was always taught you need to work hard because people who work harder, they're going to be paid accordingly. But I saw firsthand that wasn't true. It's more about working smarter and then, instituting a type of system there. And so what basically those experiences, and I'm not telling you that all of my entrepreneurial experiences paid out. I didn't talk to you about the med spa I opened in Belize on an uninhabited island that continues to be uninhabited. I didn't talk to you about the hotel, the physician hotel network we built in Florida, where we were basically kicked out from getting in someone's business. But what that led me to was eventually finding a few opportunities that actually led me to retire. I started a software company in the early 2000s. It was wildly successful. and I was actually able to retire for some time, 7-figure business. But I never let my medical license lapse. I never let that lapse. But one of the things that, for some states, if you don't practice, you could be in jeopardy of losing it. And I would joke that some of those people that I mentioned were actually my patients as well. I'm working with like these hypochondriac gurus at some point. But it allowed me to think, maybe naively, that I can apply this into any type of business. So I remember when it had been some years lapsed that I actually see patients, but I didn't want to lose my license. So I did a few, like a locum tenens for like 30 minutes. And then I go, I'm not good with like bosses. And so what I realized is if I want to get back into medicine, I wanted to do so in my own terms. So I started developing a cash-based medical practice. I wanted to go after things that I was interested in, things like integrative medicine, hormone therapy, weight loss. Those are the things that I was interested in. So I started my own cash-based medical clinic here in Southern California that later blossomed into several different clinics that I now manage. And so I've, the same aspect that I took in terms of other businesses that I joined, I now focus primarily in medical businesses. And so now with the advent of BootStrapMD, which is my consulting firm for entrepreneurs, I now advocate for other physicians to become their own bosses. And, it's been a wild ride, but so far I'm enjoying it.
Well, and I just want to ask you about that then, because you started BootStrapMD and you're talking about creating physician entrepreneurs. What do you think are the advantages for physicians who are interested in pursuing an entrepreneur path? Do you think that they have some advantages with their education or perhaps their training or something that makes them, that could be leveraged as entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think there's both advantages and disadvantages. But we'll be positive here. I think the advantages is obviously they have the smarts. I think one thing that is not often talked about, and sometimes doctors don't want to perceive themselves as, is we are strong persuaders. And, when we, what's the lifeblood of a business is sales. And I think as physicians, because we have the authority, we often have the credibility, we have the just the standing in terms of persuading people what to do. Now I know that some doctors, say, well, I don't want to be sales, I don't want to be perceived as a salesman, but we sell every day. We sell, and if you understand that sales is just another word for persuasion. We use sales when we convince someone that they need to take this prescription, when they get this x-ray, when we're convincing them that they need the surgery to extend their life. So we're doing sales every day. So I think that's a component. Generally, we have the skills to manage different things. We generally have some type of crisis management. Not everybody, not all the doctors but I think those are the skills that most doctors have. I guess superficially, financially, we're at a better position to start a business than others. For some colleagues that I know, I'm going to start this business or, I'm out, right? So they don't really have an opportunity. Now with not only with things like locums, but, telemedicine, it's kind of slow going, but there's different opportunities as physicians. We can make money and we can segment time a bit better than some others who need to work, 9 to 5 every day and then trying to start a business on the weekends. So there are definitely advantages that doctors have that oftentimes they don't realize that they do have these advantages.
And then that leads into the disadvantages, and we're not being negative here, but really, so you're looking and you've been coaching physicians through this process. What do you think are the major factors that physicians stumble upon or stumble through on their entrepreneur journey, where being a physician may has blinded them in some way or caused something that kind of gets in the way of starting this new thing?
Right. So I also host my own podcast, which is for physician entrepreneurs. And I remember one of the first early episodes is why a physician should not become an entrepreneur. So I don't think it did well for my popularity in terms of ratings of this podcast. But one of the things that I tell doctors is that most of us are followers. And to be an entrepreneur, you need to put yourself out there. And the reason why we say we're followers is kind of what I described early on, was that I was just going through, when I was getting into medical school and getting to residency, there's a certain path that you have to do, right? You have to get good grades, do some community service, take the MCATs, then, apply, get in, then you gotta, do well, and then take boards, etc. When you become an entrepreneur, there is no set path. You're gonna have ups and downs. Doctors are risk averse. Entrepreneurs full of risk. You're gonna have awesome days and you're gonna have incredibly horrible days as being an entrepreneur. And so those are one of the two biggies that I see. I think also in terms of just many doctors are afraid to put themselves out there. I want to start a business. Another episode where I said, can I start a business anonymously? Well, if you truly believe in your business, most businesses that get started, especially online, also involve a lot of personal branding. If you're not ready to put yourself out there, there's other type of businesses that you can do, but most businesses that, at least online, involve some time where you have to put you are the face of your company. And if you're not willing to do that, then you might want to find other ways to find an income.
I think that's a really great point about just being comfortable putting yourself out there, because we've had some other interviews and I've met other physicians that there's a hesitancy, or they just want to put something out without their name on it, just see how everyone reacts to it, and not just the audience online, but their own colleagues at work, and worrying about what they think. But I think it's also really reminds me of that whole dilemma, and I would say is probably back in 2013-ish, where I was looking at trying to build my confidence on understanding the online world and marketing and just business in general, because obviously we knew we didn't have that in our medical training. And what evolved out of that is a lot of enthusiasm I received from just being in those places with people that were so not followers. I mean, they wanted to learn, but they were willing to get uncomfortable and get out there and put things out there. And there were many of them, I wouldn't say all, but many of them are just truly mission-driven, heart-centered, and it really resonated with me. And so being around those people was invigorating and addictive. And but you realize you go back to work with the same people that want the status quo and are uncomfortable with change or risk averse. And so I have to go back over there to the conferences, again, non-physician conferences, not that they don't have their place or value, but I felt like if I was going to spend my money and time somewhere, I wanted something different than what's being fed to me on a daily basis. Did you get that kind of feeling?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I still spent a considerable amount of money going to these non-physician conferences, or when we could. And, some would laugh. They're saying, well, God, you spent all this money. I spent, in the 5 figures every year on masterminds and coaching. And, someone said, oh, I mean, successful. But there's, if you want to grow, you want to have mentors who are more successful than you. Mm-hmm. And what I saw as, and things are changing, but, especially back in the early 2000s, we had nothing in terms of physicians even talking about this. I remember getting invited to speak at a conference, a physician conference, and I wanted to speak about entrepreneurship. And basically they said they don't want me to speak on that because their job as physicians to write more prescriptions. That's how, look who's sponsoring this conference. You know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
And it was very disheartening to see. And I'm glad things are changing for sure. I mean, now we've got these groups and, side gigs, and thousands of doctors are now interested in it. But back then there was hardly anything. So I think now you've got a better support system that you had. But still, it's still growing, you know, where sometimes where you have to be around other entrepreneurs, you need to be around like-minded people. It's just so invigorating to be around that, and it really inspires you to continue to scale and grow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely,
I needed it
totally
back
agree.
then.
You're nodding.
We
Yeah.
still need it.
Yeah, it's nice.
I don't think unless you've been in that kind of environment, like people, oh, why would you go to an event? It's like, no, this is not the CME event where someone drones on for 8 hours a day and then everybody goes to the
Right.
room as soon as the conference is over. It's like everything starts happening after the conference, generally at the bar, and totally different environment. So, yeah, great to hear talk about that. But anyway.
Yeah. So do you want to share, is there, you know, a place that you'd like for people to find you or see what you're doing, or if they need help and need some guidance and need some, you know, invigoration, or where can they find you?
They could just, you know, go on Twitter. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just asking me. No. I got a couple of places. The first place that most people, if they want to find out kind of more about my journey, because we only covered like a few of the years here. Obviously, you know, I got some, you know, at least it makes it for some interesting reading.
Yeah.
But I read a book called The Positioned Physician, and at the time of this, it may be on Amazon, it may be not, but if you want to get access to it for quote free, you can go to this website. It's positionedphysician.com/freebook. Positionedphysician.com/freebook. You just cover some shipping and handling, and I'll ship out that book to you. This book took me 15 plus years to write. You know, it's kind of one of those things is I'm going to write a book, I'm going to write a book. And I finally wrote down and wrote about my book. Basically, it tells about my journey, about how one of the things that that you mentioned is about medicine, and if physicians want to get out of medicine. I still love medicine. I don't like every aspect of medicine. But for me, I finally found like a happy medium for me where I can live the life that I want to lead. So, for example, I don't see many patients a week. I probably see less than 5 or 10 hours a week. Not that I'm not managing my business, you know, managing a business is 40 plus hours, but more about, I have a staff, you know, under me. I have nurse practitioners, physicians, PAs who work under me, and my reach is growing in terms of improving their health, and I would just myself. And I like to, my philosophy is I think that the physician is more of a CEO. You know, a physician should be in charge of our medicine in society. For the most part, we believe the physician should be at the top of medicine these days. And my kind of philosophy helping other physicians is to see yourself as kind of the CEO. And I talk about it in the book, how I kind of manage that, how I started this cash-based business, how I developed all these other businesses that kind of feed into that. So I talk about in the book that I believe there are 3 types of income. There's active income, there's passive income, and I think you should also have passion income. So your active income is generally, you know, your current work, whatever that is, your job, what's paying the bills. You may or may not be happy with it, but it's covering your income. Your passive income could be your 401k, it could be stock market, investments, real estate, etc. And then I also think you need your passion income. And so for me, BootStrapMD is kind of my passion income. And you can find me at BootStrapMD.com, which is basically where I work with other doctors, helping them, coaching them with their different businesses, getting them on the phone. I also have courses you can find there as well on starting a cash-based business, starting an internet-based business you can look into. But is it like that's my whole income? No, it's just a part of it. But for me, my passion is working with other health providers because unfortunately, I've seen firsthand about what medicine can do to some doctors, where they often feel they don't have an opportunity, and you know where this is going to go. But I've seen where physicians decide to stop that and find that they have no way out, and use one way of getting out is to ending their life. So that's my passion of it. And And that's what I kind of believe. And we all know about burnout. I don't have to rehash everything. But just to let other doctors know, there is opportunities. And for some, entrepreneurship may be the way out.
Yeah. Kevin, any last thoughts or questions?
No, I think, as we said, we could probably talk for a lot longer than the time that we have. We'll definitely have to come you back on another episode here because we only got to 2003, I think.
Yes, that's right. That's right, 2003, right?
So much to learn, so little time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Mike. It was a pleasure to talk with you.
Oh, it was great. I think it was like therapy for me. So this saved me some time now. But I love what you guys are doing. It's always great. Like I said, hearing other physicians talk about this stuff because I can't even regret how little we had back then. And somebody listens to something like I was talking to a doctor today that I was coaching, and she said she heard something from somebody 4 months, and it allowed her to pursue this venture that was just a dream for her. And who knows where it's going to lead. So you don't realize like how many people you actually can touch. And so I think the more we kind of talk about it, the more it's going to become more mainstream. And I think medicine is going to be better as a part of it. So
yeah. Well, again, I think you've created this understanding that there's so many choices that from your environment, from your own personal beliefs, all those things came together for you to create one choice after another that created more opportunity and possibility. And I love how you're able to bring this full circle to other physicians and other people that are desperately in need of hope that there are possibilities for them and whatever works for them. And I do love this idea of the active, passive, and the passion type income. And it's very evident that that is something that's near and dear to your heart. And I want to thank you again. And for all those listening out there on the Change Physician podcast, I'm Dr. Melissa Cady with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, and our awesome guest, Dr. Mike Woo-Ming. And we look forward to hearing from him in another episode. But until next time, you all take care.